Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Мы начинаем третий день нашего архивного практикума. Сегодня у нас художественные практики, и я бы хотела предоставить слово Зарине Мұқановой и Сәуле Сүлейменовой с докладом «Қандастар туралы дастан». Спасибо.
Сәлеметсіздер ме, құрметті достар. Менің атым Зарина Мұқанова, мен әлеуметтік антропологпын. Өзімнің зерттеуім шежіре және есте сақтау туралы практикалары туралы жасағамын. Бүгінгі презентациямда Сәуле Сүлейменова екеуміз қалай бірге осы есте сақтау практикалары туралы өзіміздің коллаборациямыз туралы айтамыз. Алдын ала мен өзімнің жобам туралы айтам кішкене. Біріншіден, мүмкін мен сіздерге қазір өзімнің зерттеулерімнің барысында жасаған бірнеше видео архивтерім бар еді. Сонымен кішкене бөліскім келеді. Содан кейін өзімнің жоспарым туралы айтамын. Қазір көрсетеміз. Так. Апайлар, сіз не жасап жатырсыз, айтып беріңізші.
Біз құйрық бауыр дейді. Құйрық бауыр жасатамыз құдаға.
Бұл не үшін?
Қазақтың жолы ғой, құйрық бауыр асат. Құда болдың ба, қой сойыстың ба, құйрық бауыр асаттың ба деген.
Құда дегізген, құйрық бауыр жегізген деп айтпайсың ба? Әні бар ең сондай. Құда болдың ба, құйрық бауыр жедің ба деген осы болады. Қазір құдалардан жүстіп құйрық бауыр жегізіп, асатып, екі жақ біріне бірі. Құда болдық дегенің символы ғой негізі.
Рахмет сіздерге. Осы видеолар менің жұмыс барысында менің зерттеуім барысында Алматы облысының, бұрында Алматы облысы, қазір енді Жетісу облысында болған кішкентай бір ауылдың ішінде жасаған зерттеуім болатын. Сол зерттеуім барысында сол кішкентай ауылдың ішінде 3 түрлі қазақты кездестірдім. Алдын ала мен осы картаға сүйеніп, негізінде осы картада біздің қазақтың 300-дің руларының әртүрлі Қазақстанның аудандарында орналасқан. Бұл жаңағы 19-шы ғасыр мен 20-шы ғасырдың картасы. Востров пен Мұқанов жасаған карта болған осы. Осыған сүйеніп, мен жаңағы Жетісу облысына барып, сол жерде ұлы жүз бен орта жүздің арасындағы, шекарасындағы ауылға бардым. Сол жерде Найман мен Жалайырлардың арасындағы қандай қақтығыс болып жатыр екен бүгінгі күнде деп, сол туралы зерттеймін деп барғам. Негізінде барсам, ол жерге Найман Жалайырлары ар тұрсын. Ең маңыздысы, ең қызықтысы, ол жерге ең өзекті проблема болған кез оралмандар болған кезде. Ол кезде олар оралман деп аталған, ол 2016 жылдары. Оралмандар енді кімдер? Оралмандар қазақ этникалық репатрианттар, Жетісу облысындағы Талдықорған қаласының қасындағы Монғолия мен Қытайдан келген қазақтар екен. Жаңағы ол қазақтар енді неге осы ауылда 3 түрлі қазақ деп айтқам? Өйткені жергілікті қазақтар бар, Монғолиядан келген қазақтар, 90-шы жылдан бастап келген қазақтар, және 2000-шы жылдардан бастап келген қазақтар, Қытайдан келген қазақтар екен. Олар енді түріне қарасаң, енді бәріміз қазақпыз дейміз. Бірақ арасында олар өздерімен бөлінеді екен, өйткені жаңағы жергілікті қазақтар орысша сөйлейді, Монғолиядан, Қытайдан келген қазақтар орысша сөйлемейді. Олар қазақи, бір түрлі мәдениеттері басқаша, бізге ұқсамайды. Қазақ болса да бізге аса ұқсамайтын қазақтар сияқты болып көрінген. Өздеріне де, жергілікті қазақтарға да сондай арасында бір кішкене бір түрлі әрекеттер бар сияқты. Енді өздерін осылай бөлінеді екен. Қытайдан келген қазақтарды Қытай деп атайды екен, Монғолиядан келген қазақтарды монғолдар деп атайды екен. Жаңағы зерттеп жүрген кезінде 2021 жылы оралмандар енді қандастар деп атала бастады. Оралмандар негізінде репатриант деп қазақшаға аударуға болады, орысшаға аударуға болады. Жаңағы ол этникалық қазақтар, диаспорадан келген қазақтар. Бірақ та оралман деген сөз, ол өзінің әлеуметтік, ол негізінен ресми термин. Қазақстандық паспортын алғанға дейінгі осы бір ықтияр хатты алып жүрген кезінде қазақстандық паспортты алғанға дейінгі термин, қолданылатын термин. Ол қазақтар үшін қолданылатын термин. Бірақ та Қазақстан паспортын алғаннан кейін оралман термин жойылу керек. Ол енді Қазақстан азаматы болады деген сөз. Бірақ бізде негізінен оралман деп бәрібірде одан кейін де аталып жүреді. Оралман деп біз оларды кемсітіп айтамыз. Өйткені олар жабайы, бізге ұқсамайды, орысша түсінбейді, прогрессивті емес деп біз өзіміз солай айтамыз. Мен жергілікті қазақ болғандықтан осылай айтам. Өйткені ол шын біздің арасымызда бар. Ұят болса да, осындай болған біз айтамыз. Содан кейін, қазір келесі слайдына, жарай тұра берсін. Және де қандас деген терминге өзгерткенде негізінен осы стигманы жою үшін жасалған әрекет деп ойлауға болады бір жағынан. Екінші жағынан меніңше Қытайдағы Шыңжаң ауданындағы қайта оқыту лагерлері туралы білетін шығарсыздар. Қытайға енді Қазақстан ешқандай бір ештеңке қарсы айта алмайды, оны да білесіздер. Ол экономикалық жағынан өте қиын жағдайда Қазақстан тұр. Мен ол жайлы көп айтпай қояйын, оны сіздер де білесіздер. Сондықтан Қытайға әсіресе сен Қытай біздің қазақтарға аса көп әрекет жасама, қазақтарда біздің қазақ саны бар, оларды аса қинама дегендей осы қандасқа аударғаны маған солай көрінеді. Өйткені ештеңке айта алмайды Қытайға, бірақ экономикалық жағынан өте тәуелдіміз. Орталық Азия, дүниежүзі Орталық Азия Қытайға өте тәуелді, сондықтан осындай ғана soft power дегендей болады, осындай көрсете алады деп ойладық. Және де қандас деген сөз, ол түгелдей оралман ол тек қана ресми термин болса, қандас енді қазақстандық паспортын алған қазақтарға қазақстандық паспортын алғаннан кейін де қалатын термин. Бұл не үшін біз оны атаймыз деп осындай бір сұрақтар туды. Осылай болады. Ол жаңағы менің зерттеуімнің бір түрі, өйткені менің негізгі мақсатым болған рулар, өзіміздің тарихымыз, және де осы рулардың осы жерде көрсетіп тұрсақ, осы жерлерде тұратын жер, мысалы шекара, ұлы жүз бен орта жүздің. И как раз менің кішкентай ауылым, мен зерттеген ауылым, ол осы жерде орналасқан, осы жерлерде. Көріп тұрсаңыз, көк түспен ол жаңағы ұлы жүз, сары түспен орта жүз. Осы картаға сай көрсек, неліктен осы рулардың арасында қақтығыстар болған, неліктен бүгінгі күнге дейін көптеген анекдоттар болады. Талдықорғаннан келсе сен немене наймансың ба деп сөйлейді. Алматыда оны да білеміз. Ол неліктен бізге қызықты? Өйткені Ресей колонизациясы басталған кезде 1822 жылы Ресей жарғы шығарады устав о сибирских казаках деген, казахах, киргизах. Сонда қазақтарға, жаңағы орта жүздің, солтүстіктегі орта жүздің қазақтарына, көшпенділеріне шектеулі жерде ғана көшуге болады деп айтады. Көшпелі қазақтар ешқашан шектеулі жерде көшпеген, өздерінің туыстық жүйесіне байланысты, өзінің системасына байланысты, өзіне белгілі бір табиғи жүйелеріне байланысты көшетін. Бірақ 1822 жылдан бастап олар тек қана шектеулі жерде көшуге мәжбүр болды. Сондықтан бұл қандай результаттарға әсер алып келді? Қазақтың туыстық жүйесі дисфункционалды болды. Өйткені қазақтың туыстық жүйесі білесіздер, қызды басқа жерден алу керек, немесе туыстары басқа жерде, туыстық системасына қарай басқа жерге бару керек, немесе басқа туысқандары болса, қайындарының немесе нағашыларының жайлауларына малын жаюға болатындай бұрын болатын. Бірақ осы административтік өзгерістерден басталғаннан кейін қазақтар олай, жаңағы орта жүздің қазақтары, көшпенді қазақтары осыны енді дұрыстап жасай алмады. Сондықтан көп қазақтар, көп орта жүздің қазақтары жаңағы шығысқа қарай көше бастады. Шығысқа қарай көше бастаған кезде көбісі Монғолияға кетті бұлай. Шыңжаңнан бастап, мынау жер Шыңжаң. Немесе және оңтүстіктегі қазақтарды, басқа руларды енді кішкене олар қалай, қиына емес, солардың жайлауларына бастап көше бастады. Сондықтан мынау жерде бір қиыншылықтар басталған болатын. Мүмкін бұдан да бұрын қиыншылықтар болатын шығар. Оны біз білмейміз, бірақ отарлау саясатының әсерінен олар көше бастады. Содан кейін отарлау саясаты тек қана осылай административтік жүйелерден өзгеруінен басталған жоқ. Ол жаңағы Ресейден келген көптеген крестьяндар, славяндар көптен көше бастады. Олар жақсы, жайлы жерлерді, жайлауларды олар қолдана бастады. Өйткені олар үшін, отырықшы орыстар үшін бұл жаңағы жерлер ешкім қолданбайды деп ойлаған. Өйткені олар жаңағы егіншілер. Олар біз көшпенділердің өмірін түсінбейді. Бүгінгі күнге дейін не үшін оларды жерді дұрыстап қолданбайды деп ойлады да, жерлерін алып алды. Содан кейін қазақтарды, көшпенді қазақтарды қыстау жерлеріне, жаңағы шөбі аз жерлеріне тығыстыра бастады. Қыстау деген жер ол шөл жерлер, ол жерде қар аз, және ол дегенмен қыста қар аз, қыста мал жақсы тұра алады. Қар аз, жылырақ болады деп. Бірақ жайлау көп жерлерде шөбі мол, ол жерлері енді жаңағы славяндық крестьяндар алып алды. Ол бір жер. Содан жаңағы менің мақсатым, бұл тағы осы Ресей отарлығының тарихын зерттеу, менің мақсатым қазақтың Шыңжаңдағы, Монголиядағы диаспораларының қалай пайда болуы, неліктен олар пайда болды ол жерде. Әрине біз білмейміз, мүмкін Шыңжаң, Монголия жақтарда бұрыннан қазақтар тұрған шығар, бірге монголдармен бірге, ойраттармен бірге тұрған шығар, оны біз білмейміз, мүмкін болған шығар. Бірақ Қытайдың қазақтарын зерттеген кезде осыны білдім. Қазақта ол жерде ескі қазақтар бар, жаңа қазақтар бар. Неге ескі жаңа қазақтар бар? Жаңа деп бөлінеді екен. Ескі деген олар бұрыннан бері ол жерде Шыңжаң өңірінде тұрған қазақтар дейді. Жаңа қазақтар ол 1917 жылы, 16 жылы, жаңа 30 жылдары ашаршылықтан, революциядан қашқан қазақтарды жаңа қазақтар деп атайды екен. Жаңа қазақтар болғанда әр рудың, оларда рулар бар. Мысалы, бір рулар бар, уақ деген бір ру бар. Олар жаңа уақ, ескі уақ деп бөлінеді екен Қытайда. Бізде ондай бөліну жоқ біздің уақтардың арасында. Өйткені ескі уақтар бұрыннан Қытайда тұрған уақтар екен. Жаңа уақтар жаңағы революциядан уақтар екен. Сөйтіп осындай рулардың бөлінулері бар екен. Ал енді келесі неге барсақ, енді тағы бір қызық тақырыбым шежіре. Неліктен шежіре? Оралмандар мен шежіре деген ол бір бөлек заттар деп ойламаңыз. Негізінде менің жазған диссертациямның ішінде олар бір теманың үлкен бірнеше бөліктері. Шежіре ол біздің генеалогия, орысша айтқанда, бірақ ол ауызша берілетін генеалогия, ол жазбаша емес. Ауызша берілетін генеалогия дегенмен ол біздің рулық, біздің тектілігімізге өте қатты байланысты, оның бір ең маңызды бөлігі. Өйткені біз жеті ата дегенді руды білем, жеті ата деген ру емес, жеті ата деген правило. Ережені білеміз, рахмет. Ережені білеміз. Жеті ата деген, жеті атадан тыс, егер қыз күйеуге шыққысы келсе, немесе ер жігіт қыз алғысы келсе, жеті атадан тыс болу керек. Ол заң. Ол тек қана қазақтың заңы емес, ол көшпенділердің заңы, ол көптеген көшпенді халықтардың арасындағы болатын заң. Жеті ата ең кемінен қазақ болу үшін, ең кемінде сен өзінің жеті атаңды білуің керексің. Одан кейін сен өзінің руың білу керексің. Кей кезде кейбір рулар, үлкен рулар, мысалы Найман уақ дейміз, Қыпшақ дейміз, Жалайыр дейміз, үлкен рулар, оның бір өзінің генеалогиямызды табу өте қиын болады, өйткені олар 77 атадан көп болып кетеді. Сондықтан кемінен 7 атаңды білсең, өзінің жаңағы руларының тармақтарын білсең, ол өте маңызды. Осы суретте сіздер көресіздер 7 ата. Мысалы, бала мен болсам, менің әкем, атам, арғы ата, етек ата, 7 ата болып жетеуінің атауы. Егер төмен түсіп барсақ, мен әке болсам, немесе ана болсам, менің балам, содан кейін немерем, содан кейін туажат деп 9-шы несіне дейін жетеді. Сол біліктен бұл білу міндет. Өйткені бұл біздің қазақтың туыстық жүйеміздің системасының ең маңызды тармақтары біз үшін біздің тектілігіміз, біздің бірегейлігіміз, идентичностіміздің ең маңызды заттары. Маңызды нелерді. Мысалы, қазіргі күнгі енді аса жақсы көрінбеді. Күні бүгінге дейін қазақтар өздерінің шежіресін енді қазір жазбаша түрде көрсетіп тұр. Ол бейнетаспада, видео архивтерде, фотосуреттерде, family stories, family trees дейміз, да, осындай генеалогиялар шығарып тұрады. Көптеген кітаптар бар. Әртүрлі 300-дің өзінің бөлек тармақтары, әр рудың өзінің бөлек бір томдары бар. Ол да өте маңызды. Өзіміздің көптеген энтузиастар қазақтың тарихын, өзінің руларын тарихын зерттейтін адамдар, ақсақалдар көбінесе осындай кітаптарды жазады. Бірақ дегенмен жас адамдарда осыны зерттейтін қызығатын адамдар да көп. Осы бір кішкене бір экзампл көп. Енді қалай біз оралман қандастар туралы айтсақ, отарлау нарративтері. Бүгінгі күнге біздің жаңа қандастар туралы кішкене айтып көргенде, бүгінгі күнге дейін біз қандастарды, орысша сөйлемейтін қазақтарды, тек қана қандастарды ғана емес, орысша сөйлемейтін қазақтарды, көбінесе ауылдық қазақтарды біз отарлау нарративтері арқылы біз оларды сипаттаймыз. Отарлау нарративтері қандай болады? Стигма, менсінбеушілік, кемсіту, жалған сенім. Біз оларды стигматизацияға қалай ұшыратамыз? Орысша сөйлемейді, прогрессивтік емес, ауылдан келген, оқымаған қара қазақ, қазақбай, колхозник, ауылбай деп оларды айтамыз. Неге біз оларды олар деп айтамыз? Менің зерттеуімнің мүмкін ең маңызды, мен үшін ең маңызды бір түбірі, өзіме не үшін мен қалалық қазақтың қызы, орысша жетік білетін, қазақша жетік білмейтін қазақтың қызы, басқа қазақтарды олар деп айтады, өзімді басқа мен деп айтамын, менен басқа деп, менен өзге деп, неменен өзге деп атаймын деп мен өзіме сұрақ қойдым. Сол үшін мен осы зерттеуді бастадым. Достарымның, туыстарымның қолдауымен, Құдайдың қолдауымен, әруақтардың қолдауымен бітірдім. Мен ойладым, не үшін біз оларды стигматизацияға ұшыратамыз? Не үшін қазіргі келген, бізде біздің досымыз бар, Қытайдан келген қазақ, Тілек Рысбек. Ол маған бір рет интервью берген. Ол жасы 10-11-лерде болған кезде Қазақстанға көшіп келген екен. Енді мектепке барады, 5-ші класс оқушысы. Сонда класстастары оған, сен бізді сатып кеткен сатқындардың, байлардың тұқымысың деп, оны осылай ұрған екен, сол үшін жаман айтқан екен. Ол балалар олар кішкентай балалар, 10 жасар, 11 жасар балалар қайдан біледі? Оған ата-анасы, әке-шешесі айтқан екен. Олар қалай білген оны? Ол сталиндік совет үкіметінің, кеңес үкіметінің идеологиясы кезінде көшіп кеткен қазақтарды, жаңағы картаны көрген кезінде, көшіп кеткен қазақтарды откачевники деп айтқан кезінде. не просто кочевники, откочевники, кеткендер, бізді тастап кеткен. Біз осы жерде қиналып коммунизмді жасауға тырыстық. Бірақ сендер байдың тұқымдарысыңдар, бізді сатып кетіп қалдыңдар, бізді қиыншылықта қалдырдыңдар деп үйреткен бізді. Сөйтіп әке шешесі, ата аналасы қиналғандықтан да бәрібірде осы ойды дұрыстап сынамай, әлі күнге дейін қайта балаларына беріп жатыр. Соны біз 32 жыл болды ма егемендіктеміз. Бірақ әлі күнге дейін неліктен біз осы отарлық нарративтерді қайталаймыз. Не үшін? Сол да менің бір сұрақтарымның біреуі болды. Содан кейін келесі, оралман ұғымдары, осы туралы мен жаңа бір-екі сөз айтып кеттім. Содан кейін тағы бір тақырыбының бір қызықты жері, ол әйелдер болды. Әйелдердің рөлі, әйелдердің орны. Жаңағы біздің жадымыз, есіміз қалай беріледі. Жеті ата, ол тек қана ер кісілер туралы біз айтамыз. Жарайды, басқа слайд көрсет. Әйелдердің қазақ достық жүйесіндегі рөлі. Енді осы соңғы слайд, өйткені мен ойладым, мен жаңа тек қана сөйлеймін осы туралы. Содан кейін мен Сәулеге сөзімді берем. Жеті ата дейміз, ұл, бала, әке, ол тек қана еркектердің терминдері, еркектерді сипаттайтын терминдерді. Әйелдер қайда ол жерде? Егер де туыстық қатынастарды білетін болсақ, біз білеміз, біздің өз жұртымыз бар, әкеміздің жұрты, ол өз жұртымыз, тек қана менің жұртым. Және де менің шешемнің жұрты, мамамның жұрты, ол нағашылар болады. Олар басқа, бірақ олардың орындары бөлек. Дегенмен қыз күйеуге шыққан кезде оның өз жұрты қалай аталады? Басқа ат беріледі оған, иә? Ол аты қалай болады? Білесіздер ме сіздер? Төркіндер болады. Төркіндер. Дегенмен әйелдер үшін, егер әйел күйеуге шыққан кезде, некелескеннен кейін, оның өз жұрты, өз жұртының группасы, аты өзгеше болып кетеді. Төркіндер болады. Дегенмен мен күйеуге шықтым, менің өз жұртым төркіндер болды. Ал еркек кісі үйленген кезде, оның өз жұрты өзгере ме? Өзгермейді. Өйткені ол өзінің жұртында қалады. Дегенмен, бауырлар, бірақ бәрібірде ол өз жұртының несі қалады. Және де кейбір рулардың ішінде әйелдер күйеуге шыққаннан кейін қайындардың жұрты, күйеуінің жұрты өз жұрты болып аталып кетеді. Бірақ әр руларда әртүрлі. Содан кейін әйелдердің рөлі қандай осы жерде? Дегенмен қыз бала кезінен өзінің жеті атасын білу керек. Ер бала да жеті атасын білу керек. Бірақ қыз бала күйеуге шыққаннан кейін ол күйеуінің жеті атасын да білу керек. Жора жекжаттарын барлығын, күйеуінің ағайындыларын барлығын аттарын білу керек. Кім кім болып келеді. Өйткені не үшін ол білу керек? Өйткені бала туған кезде ол өзінің балаларына осы білімді беру керек. Оны күйеу бермейді, әкесі бермейді. Әкесі береді де, бірақ әйелдің рөлі осындай болды. Мен сіздерге бір дисклеймер берейін. Мен қазір осы қазақтың әйеліне осындай болу керек деп айтып тұрған жоқпын. Менің айтып тұрғаным дәстүрлі қазақтың қоғамында осындай болған деп айтып тұрмын. Қазір әр әйел өзінің не жасағысы келеді өзінің ойында. Мен осындай жасау керек деп айтып тұрған жоқпын. Ол мен зерттеген ауылымда осындай болған деп айтып тұрмын. Сөйтіп, күндердің бір күнінде былтыр ма, 2 жыл өтті ма, біз Сәуле екеуміз көп сөйлестік осы туралы. Мен тағы да Сәулеге өзімнің видеоархивтерін көрсеттім, фотоархивтерін көрсеттім. Сонген менің бір түсімде бір рет жаңағы мен суретке түсіргенде бір тойдың ішіндегі апалар отырған, 7 апа отыр. 7-6 апа басқа тойдың суреттерін көрсеткен кезде сол бір рет түсімде осы суреттердің біреуі маған түсіме кіреді да, и бір дауыс шығады: сен Сәулеге осы суреттерді көрсет деп айтады. Мен онда ойладым, Сәуле деген ол мықты адам, қалай мен Сәулеге айтамын: сен маған осындай сурет, маған осындай түс кірді, саған осындай осы суретті қарап жұмысыңды жаса деп қалай айтам, үлкен кісі деп ойладым. Содан бір-екі ай ойландым. Содан бір күні мен жарайды деп айта салайын, енді өзі біледі, жасай ма жасамай ма, енді түсімді айтып бердім. Сәуле енді қуана қарсы алды суретімді, менің түсімді. Өйткені біз уже көп уақытта уже сөйлесіп жүрдік осы жұмыстар туралы, мен өзімнің зерттеуім туралы, Сәуле өзінің суреттерін көрсетті, жұмысын көрсетті. Өте қызық, бір-бірімізде өте ықпалды әңгімелер болды. Сөйтіп Сәуле екеуміз осындай бір коллаборацияға, жұмысқа кірістік. Сіздерге рахмет. Қазір Сәулеге сөзімді берем, содан кейін уақыт болса сұрақтарыңызды қоя аласыздар. Рахмет.
Кешіріңіз, мен орысша бастаймын. Ну, так, помогите, пожалуйста. Да, я сейчас пересяду. Ну, я продолжу на русском. На самом деле, где-то с 2004 года я начала работать с архивными фотодокументами. И как бы начала свою серию работ сначала «Казахская хроника». И как бы пафосом идеи этой серии было передать как бы национальную идею. И я понимала, что в этом мне моя фантазия, мое воображение не должно помогать. И я подумала, что наиболее правильное решение – это обратиться к документам, которые есть, фотодокументам. То есть это единственный способ показать как бы через себя. То есть я в данном случае выступаю как инструмент, вот, и то, как я это делаю, только в этом как бы имеется как бы мое личное как бы участие. Есть некий архивный фотодокумент, и есть результат, та визуализация, которую я делаю. То есть мои руки как бы являются вот этим вот проводником. Вот. То есть благодаря тому, что что я выбираю из этих всех огромного количества этих фотодокументов, что я выбираю. Вот. Ну, начну вот как бы с самых старых работ. Это работа 2008 года из серии «Казахская хроника». Вот. Это живопись на фотографии. И в данном случае, то есть это как бы игра такая двух времен, настоящего и прошлого. То есть фон – это фотография стены гаража из того настоящего 2008 года. И изображение – это женщины из фотографии 1884 года из архива академика Алькея Маргулана. И недавно в прошлом году я повторила эту же работу, но уже в пластике. Здесь вы видите, как эти же персонажи, эти три женщины, 3 разных возрастов, 3 разных социальных статусов, из архива Алькея Маргулана, как они визуализированы в пластике. То есть для меня вот этот момент очень важен. Почему я обращаюсь к пластику сейчас? Потому что как бы я таким образом визуализирую ту остаточную как бы память, которая осталась в виде фотодокументов из остаточного материала, который мы как бы выбрасываем после использования. Вот. Ну, я вот просто быстро пройдусь. Это моя, вот почему я показываю эту работу, потому что вот вариант абсолютно, это моя фантазия. То есть здесь нет такой опашки, нет такой девочки. Работа называется «Далагашев Гамус», но здесь она абсолютно, то есть эти образы выдуманы. Вот. Это тоже работа основана на фотографии из архива Алькея Маргулана. Вот. И я хочу показать, как она теперь выглядит в пластике. То есть и сейчас она выглядит в пластике. Вот. Это опять как бы фотография стены 2008 года. И девочек я, можно сказать, почти придумала. То есть позволила себе вольное какой-то отход. Но вот здесь вот очень важно. То есть вот фотография, которую вы видите, черно-белая фотография в углу, это все на тот момент, это 1876 год, извиняюсь, 96 год, это все на тот момент наиболее знаменитые салы, сире казахские. Тут и буржан сал, тут и акан сире, тут и жаяу муса. И я, вот этот мой выбор, то есть из этого всего, как сказать, из этих всех музыкантов, которые изображены на этой фотографии, я позволила себе вытащить 2, при том, что человека с дамброй я не знаю, и кто он такой, я не знаю, но знаю, что жаяу муса, вот человек со скрипкой. И почему? Потому что мне показалось, этот фон потрясающая гаражная стена на закате. Вот. В ней просто я увидела жаяу мусу. Вот. Я просто быстро пройдусь уже по разным работам из прошлого, вот как это выглядела казахская хроника. То есть пафос мой был такой, что, обращаясь к этим старым архивным документам, обращаясь к этим старым образам, вот, и вытаскивая их на современных стенах, на как бы стенах современного города, таким образом я как бы рисую такую, как бы визуализирую как бы настоящее казахское, вот, как мне казалось. Вот. Ну, я вот пройдусь, то есть быстро по работам. Ну, вот это тоже серия Аруахи. Вот. Я тоже вытащила из архивной фотографии изображение молодой женщины. Вот. Просто когда я фотографировала эту стену с тенями деревьев, она как бы проявилась. Тут с руахами такая вещь, они проявляются там, где они хотят. Вот. Это тоже вот. Тут вообще это был мусор, строительный мусор, сетка рабица, оборванные какие-то вот эти вот натягивают вот на стройке вот такие вот вещи. И там проявилась эта такая очень аристократичная семья. Вот, я просто им помогла проявиться. Вот, да, и вот здесь тоже я просто им помогла проявиться. Вот. Ну вот, например, вот сама фотография, она 1900-го, кажется, года. Вот. И вот они у меня проявились на доске объявлений около Никольского базара. Вот. И Скелин, вот сама это наиболее известная фотография, которая сейчас находится в этнографическом музее в Санкт-Петербурге. Вот. На самом деле она из архива тоже Алькея Маргулана. Вот. И вот она, вот как у меня трансформировалась, и я трансформировалась, и вместе с ней они трансформировались тоже в разных версиях. И вот это вот уже из пластиковых пакетов. Вот это большая работа. Вот. Вот они как превращались в разных. Ну, то есть, по сути, я стараюсь быть... Я всегда смотрю на оригинал, на саму фотографию, но то, как я это выражаю, меняется от того, какая я сейчас. Вот. Это Астана Лайн. Ну, я тут быстро, простите. И давайте я просто... Вот уже вот как бы свежие архивы. Это то, что было у нас в 2017 году в связи с новым законом с требованием регистрироваться всем людям, живущим не по прописке. Вот. И я просто набирала из новостных каналов разные изображения этой толпы, как это было, и в результате сделала серию работ ЦОН. И вот я сделала вот такой триптих. Вот. И вот тут тоже вот архивная фотография Пашкина Корове. Это немецкого исследователя. Фотография 1916 года. И как она у меня трансформировалась сначала в живопись на фотографии, а потом вот в такую инсталляцию. Да, и вот это тоже живопись на фотографии из серии Астана Лайн. Это уже пакеты. И вот семья Абая. Вот она была на доске объявлений в виде аруахов прозрачные. И потом она превратилась вот в работе. Вот это пакеты. Вот фрагменты такие. Вот. Это все пакеты. Полиэтилен на полиэтиленовой пленке вторичной переработки. Вот. И квинтэссенцией вот как бы работы с архивом я могу назвать, ну, на тот момент это серия «Остаточная память». Вот это известная фотография из времени Ашаршылыка, как люди уходят. Вот то, о чем говорила Зарина, от кочевники, да, люди, которые уходят в поисках еды. Вот. И вот моя работа. И вот, когда я начала работать с серией «Остаточная память», я поняла, что наиболее важное здесь, раз я являюсь инструментом передачи вот этого визуального знания, то наиболее важным является моя эмоция, которую я испытываю в этот момент. Чтобы начать эту серию, я неделю готовилась к этому. Мне кажется, очень важно иметь вот этот правильную эмоцию. Ну, и вот это дети после Ашуршылыка. Видно на этой фотографии, что они собраны на перроне перед поездом. Сзади вон стоят взрослые люди, и какие-то офицеры, какие-то взрослые люди, представители каких-то пенитенциарных учреждений. Вот. И они собирают выживших детей, в основном мальчиков, чтобы отправить их в детдома. Вот. И вот выжившие дети. Если говорить об этом, то это важный момент. Недавно я сделала новую работу Ашуршылык Аруахтар, потому что эти дети, которые выжили после Ашуршылыка, это и есть наши аруахи, это и есть наши предки, потому что, ну, на самом-то деле мы дети выживших, вот. Но вот просто феномен вот этот вот того, что мы, к сожалению, ну, не все, но какая-то часть нас не говорит казахша, это еще вот как бы то, что мы потомки этих детей, которые уходили в детдома советские, где, как вот мой дед, предположим, Абдрахим Елиманов Аргата по маме, ему не давали есть, если он не скажет по-русски. Вот. Вот. Но это вот уже переселенцы в Казахстан. Вот. И это работа моя. Спецпереселенцы. Это вот первая волна. Ну как, не первая, одна из первых, это 30-е годы. Вот. И Карлак. Вот эта фотография. И так как мой дед был со стороны отца был узником Карлага, я сделала работу Карлаг «Everyone feels well». Everyone feels well – это просто слова, которые я нашла в пакетах, вот, и они стали вот как бы таким знаком того, что было. И Желтоксан, вот, и мой Желтоксан из пакетов вот такой. Вот. И это Желтоксан второй день. Вот. И это, ну, эта история, вы знаете, да, что всех ребят, которые на площади собрались, их собирали в грузовики и вывозили, и выбрасывали в степи, в карьер. Вот. И как они оттуда выбирались, вот. Кто-то выбирался, кто-то нет, было очень холодно. Вот. И работа «Синьцзянская чистка». Вот. Эта работа предшествует тому, что мы начали работать с Зариной. В данном случае тут очень мое вольное такое использование фотоматериала. Я просто в Гугле искала и собрала как бы в фотошопе некий такой образ таких средних, типичных центральноазиатских женщин. Они могут быть казашки, уйгурки, узбечки, кыргызки. Но вот этот стиль одежды у нас как бы из восточного Туркестана они могут быть. Стиль одежды у нас как бы один присущ женщинам. И как они постепенно теряют свою идентичность. Вот. Сначала они теряют цвет, а потом они теряют все и становятся аруахами. Вот. То есть эта работа, она предшествовала нашей работе с Зариной, вот, можно сказать, потому что это первый раз я обратилась как бы к проблеме кандасов, проблеме людей, живущих в Восточном Туркестане. Вот. Как она выглядела на выставке в прошлом году, на моей выставке «Біз қарапайым халықпыз». Тут я, ну просто вот тут важный момент. Тут я обращаюсь к своей личной истории. Это фотография новосибирские татары на пикнике. Вот. И это работа, которую я сделала в этом году. Она имеет ко мне прямое отношение. Вот человек в белом – это мой прадед Гариф Валеев. Он был башкир, и он был имам Новониколаевской губернии и построил мечеть в Новосибирске. Вот. Его жена, моя прабабушка Фатима, моя бабушка Сафана Гарифовна Валеева в девичестве. Это его тукал, казашка, и их ребенок. Ну, у них было с моей прабабушкой, у моего прадеда и прабабушки было 13 детей. Это его друг, русский учитель, и его жена. Их репрессировали раньше, и он это понял, что репрессии коснутся всех. И тогда он сказал перед смертью уже на смертном одре: разводись со мной, а то вас всех заберут. И она успела развестись за полмесяца до его смерти. Вот. И таким образом это вот дети в основном. Ну, вот это моя бабушка, это вот дети их. А Тукал сбежала. Она вообще была девчонка. Вот, она ушла. Вот. Ну, для меня это была важная работа, и я ее назвала так Тулом, да, моя идентичность. Вот, потому что мне показалось, что как бы, то есть вот это нагаша, это очень важная часть моей идентичности. Вот. Вот здесь это моя бабушка Сафана Гарифовна, а это моя Фатима Апа, она была Абыстай. Вот что очень интересно, вот эта культура городских татар и вообще городских тюрков на территории Советского Союза, как бы Российской империи, была вот эта вот культура Абыстай, когда девушек с самого раннего возраста обучали через Коран и исламскую литературу, грамоте, и как бы давали им образование широкое, что помогло моей вот прабабушке Фатиме Апе. В 60-х годах она ходила, она уже в Алмате ходила по свадьбам и похоронам, и везде читала Коран. Вот. Но эта работа вот из прошлогодней выставки «Баскарапаем Халыкпас», вот это моя уже более, ну как бы, то есть это не, сказать, это мое как бы такое уже вольное изображение того, что произошло в Канда-Кантар. Вот. Я взяла просто совершенно открыточное изображение площади Республики, вот, и просто покрасила ее в красный цвет. Вот. И так было, все окна были закрыты красными пакетами. И вот так это выглядело в зале. Вот. И в этом году я повторила, ну, в смысле, сделала как бы тоже на основании вот этих всех изображений, что произошло, когда уже по людям начали стрелять, и сделала работу «Туман Канда-Кантар». Вот, я прошлась быстро по предыдущим своим работам, чтобы показать уже нашу совместную работу с Зариной, но я хочу предупредить, я вас очень прошу, не снимайте изображения людей, потому что у нас большая победа. Мы с Зариной подписали договор. Это было как это называется? Как? Пробона. То есть международная юридическая компания как смогла нам сделать такой договор, который позволяет защитить права этих людей, которых я изобразила благодаря Зарининым исследованиям. Вот. Вот это удивительно вообще произошло. Когда Зарина показывала мне эти фотографии, я плакала, а потом попросила ее, чтобы она позволила мне их использовать для своего проекта. И она сказала, что ей приснился тот же сон. Она вот только что рассказывала об этом. Вот, что эти опашки пришли к ней во сне и попросили обратиться. Вот, вот это первая работа. Вот. Но когда я делала работы, я не стремилась к портретному сходству. Вот. Вот, да, здесь руки тоже. Это все пакеты, тут нет никаких художественных материалов, тут просто пакеты. Вот, например, вот это фотоматериал. То есть то, что вы видите слева это мой уже эскиз в фотошопе, и вот справа вы видите, из чего он как бы составлен. Вот. И вот эта работа. Вот тут очень момент такой важен, вот, что здесь много таких вот знаков. Во-первых, по цвету мне хотелось показать, что эти люди приехали из Китая, и они привезли другой цвет, да, который как бы казахам не свойственен. То есть их цвет изменился. То есть, прожив в Китае, у них уже, они, то есть, как бы лепят как бы свою казахскость из другого колорита, что ли. Вот. И вот в данном случае как бы из разных, ну и как пакеты, люди как пакеты на самом деле. Вот. И вот эта работа, это вообще серия Кандастар Туралы Дастан, она как бы говорит о том, что вот люди как пакеты. Есть пакеты как бы такие тойские, саркытные пакеты, да. Ну вот мне показалась вот эта фраза «это мы». Да, мне тоже вот хотелось повторить за Зариной, что это не олар, это не они, это мы. Не надо как бы нас отделять от этих людей. Вот. И вот то, что мне тоже показалось важным, что everyone deserves, да, каждый заслуживает такую расслабленную позу, в которой лежит, вот, да, это опашка, вот видите, она лежит, вот, и, вот, это вот, да, сидят они прекрасные такие, вот. Ты же это, ну сейчас ты расскажешь, да, еще об этом, вот. И вот они у меня так. Ну, я просто еще хочу сказать, что пленка прозрачная, тут абсолютно прозрачная, вот. И она растворяется, то есть наши кандастар, они растворяются на любом, как бы на любой стене и становятся как бы частью. Вот тут очень важный момент, и я бы хотела тоже, потому что об этом говорила, заканчивала Зарина, и я тоже хотела сказать. Вот эта работа, она как бы очень важна, и она как бы последняя была из этой серии. Я хотела вообще на самом деле делать большой такой эпос, да, из множества работ, но случился Канда-Кантар, и после этого это все как бы закончилось. Но тут очень важно, что эту работу я назвала «Жетана». Вот здесь 7 женщин. Вот. Эти 7 женщин, с которыми общалась Зарина, каждая из них имеет по 10-12 детей, бесчисленное количество внуков и правнуков. И самое главное, что они обладают уникальной информацией о Шежире, о Жетеата. Они знают все о своем роде, о роде своего мужа. Вот. И они передают эту информацию своим детям. Вот. То есть и при этом сами не остаются, получается, в Шежире, Ищенде. Вот.
Thank you very much, Jamila, and everyone at Cellinный and Garage for this opportunity, for letting me speak to you and for inviting me to share with you some of our thinking and notes in the practice that I represent, the RAAN Media Collective. It's also a reading, in a sense, of the archive of our thinking and our practice, and a reading of our habit of reading. Perhaps we could think of this exercise as a correction to the first draft of history, where we become guests in our stories, in our own stories and accounts of the world and of this time. It is a real pleasure to be in Almaty for me, a city that feels strangely familiar, though I've never been here before, where stray words and names in the Kazakh language, for instance, when I hear them, remind me of the resonances that a city like Delhi, my own hometown, has historically had with the worlds of Central Asia. Let me at the outset say, since we've heard so much, especially yesterday, about the term post-Soviet, that it has strange resonances that may appear unfamiliar to you. I think I come from a post-Soviet family. I said this to some of you. I remember entering my father's family home in a village in the East Indian state of West Bengal through a door that had this image in a large print framed above it. It's a print taken from a painting titled The Great Friendship by the Soviet Armenian artist Dmitry Nalbandian in 1950. How this image made its way to my father's village is an archival story all on its own. And it footnotes my personal effort to deal with the horrible legacies of Stalinism and of Maoism that are a part of the heritage of many people. I mean, in the last discussion, the reason why Uyghurs are displaced or Kazakhs come to Kazakhstan has, Kazakhs from China come to Kazakhstan has a little bit to do with these two legacies. So it's part of a history that many families, including my own, have to deal with. And I think it's the personal responsibility of everyone touched by this legacy, especially if they continue to locate themselves on the left, as I do, to deal with this legacy. But let us leave this problem aside for now. It's a big, big question. The point I'm making is, unlike what this picture suggests, Mao hated Stalin, right? But did not dare to say it aloud, at least not while he was in the Soviet Union. Stalin was also very suspicious of Mao in the way that one dictator is of another dictator. This is normal. And that the great friendship soured very quickly. It became the great antagonism. If you look at the memoranda which are present in the archives of this meeting that took place in Moscow in December 1949, you can see how skeptical and suspicious the two men are of each other. But this image tries to communicate something else. And it too is now an archival item. It has hardly any aesthetic value. It's quite a boring picture. Hardly any art historical value, but a fair amount of historical and archival value. So it's two kinds of archival data contradict each other. The past, especially the expanded post-Soviet past, is full of such puzzles and riddles with lots of holes in between. But the past and our scattered presence is also full of resonances. For example, the word Urdu, which is the language that I speak because it's one of the languages in Delhi, it's one of the languages that I speak, is closely tied by its very name to a word cognate with the Kazakh yurt. So Urdu is the language of those who came in the yurt, because they are people who came, especially soldiers, who lived in tents, which were continued to be called yurtu, and it became Urdu. And like a tent, a yurt, it shelters a sensibility that moved and changed, but also hasn't changed as it traveled across vast distances like a nomad. In RAACs, and that's the three of us, we like looking at maps and diagrams. We are cartographers on our feet. We're artists. We're also nomads. Nomadism is not a one-off singular movement from one location to another. It requires regularities and returns. This is the difference between the nomad and the migrant. The nomad walks the same path between places. The migrant leaves one place for another. And yesterday, there was a lot of discussion about names, about how do we call ourselves? And I think this naming question has an interesting history, because for thousands of years, people had more than one name. and they changed their names, and they shifted names from one place to another, but they were the same people. Today, we live in nation states that have very tight boundaries. So this question of who you are, where do you belong, where are you coming from, these have a very different resonance from the way that had in our ancestors. And if you look at a lot of self-identifying names of people in many languages, they actually simply mean human being, right? So people call themselves human being in their own languages, and other people say, oh, that means they are this or that or the other. So this question of naming and identity is a complicated one, but it's much more fluid and supple than perhaps we trick ourselves into believing. The betweenness of the first movement of the nomad and the finality of the second departure enclosed between them, of the migrant, a world of difference. In fact, this difference may be what we are struggling to define as a distinction between translocality, the movement patterns of populations, and Central Asia, right down to the city that I come from, is like a vortex of movement, and the hegemonic form of globalization, which suggests movement is possible only in one direction or another direction. A brief digression into a work of ours called Escapement, inspired by the horological or clock-making science that makes the mechanism of watches. So if you look at how old-fashioned mechanical watches move, they release and close the hand that moves, like, you know, and the minute hand or the second hand escapes from the catch that holds it. It's the same with the 35mm, 16mm film projector. There's a hook that catches the sprocket in a film and then releases it. That movement is what creates the impression of time. Escapement. This installation actually, this is a detail. So you have words for emotions, which replace the hours of the day. So it can be, if you transpose this into a global time frame, there can be many clocks for many cities. There could be a clock for Almaty, there could be a clock for Moscow. In Russia, I believe that you have 11 time zones. So you can have 11 clocks that are just in Russian, and they would still describe different states of being and emotion. And it would suggest that while we share a similar set of sentiments, we feel the same things, but we don't necessarily feel them at the same time. There's a kind of logic of similarity, resonance, as well as difference in the world. So it's an archive of emotions, a calendar, a way of reading space, and a way of reading time. The path that nomads walk on need to be maintained over time and across generations. While settlements have witnessed ebbs and flows, cities have been depopulated and repopulated, so have trade routes. The entire history of Central Asia and the languages that many of us speak, from Turkey to Bangladesh, from Kazakhstan to Karnataka and the south of India, bear witness to the obstinate persistence of nomadism across generations. This permanence requires that there be stable institutions of hospitality for practices of nomadism. So while nomads move, they're also the great hosts. They're always guests in other people's lands, but they also have very deep cultures of hospitality. Hence, sarais. Sarais are places where travelers can meet. And you can see this in place names. So I believe there's a place in Kazakhstan called Sarayjuk. There is Sarajevo in Bosnia, which comes from Saray. Topkapi Saray in Istanbul is now a palace and a museum, but it must have started as a place where people could just meet and stay and strangers could meet each other. So in 2000, we in the Raqs Media Collective started a place called Sarai. And it's interesting to talk about it right now because it was both a meeting place of practices and practitioners. So we had artists, you had writers, you had people working with new technologies of software and computing, urbanists, but it also developed an archive of the present moment. It was not just dealing with an archive of the past, but it was dealing with an archive of the present, because we realized that in a city like Delhi, let's say where I'm located, which has a population of roughly 24 million people, which is a lot of people, there's a lot of things that get forgotten very quickly. So you need to create reservoirs of memory and archive for them. So you can still see this website. I'm not a part of it anymore, but it produced an archive through research fellowships, and people researched all sorts of things, from plumbing networks to popular print culture to music to all sorts of forms, so that we actually created a sense of the memory of our present for the future. Nomadism and location have, in this instance, imperative of remembering things. So nomads also have this culture of passing on oral histories and oral traditions. So the reason why you know what your ancestors sang or spoke 800 years ago is because nomads pass things down through speech and through song and through gesture. And these are very valuable records. So they're a kind of intangible archive that is present in people's voices and bodies. They're not necessarily written down, but they're also a kind of archive. So for us, making books, working with words, working with ideas was also, as a publication program like what you have in Cellinный, was also the creation of an archive for the future. Because all this material will one day be looked at and people will then say, okay, there was this place called Cellinный in Almaty, and this is what it was doing in the year 2023, which changed the world here, right? So this question of location and wandering have a symbiotic relationship, and the decline of many cities and seemingly permanent settlements in our geographies have also to do with the inability of nomads to traverse well-worn paths because of borders that inhibit movement. The tragic destiny of a city like Kabul from the early 20th century onwards, right through the war in Afghanistan, which I'm sure affected people here because there must have been families whose sons went to the war from here, right? Now to the Taliban years, is, for instance, signatory of the fact of what happens to a location when borders close in and nomads carrying ideas and images and songs and things from other spaces are no longer welcome. In such times, it becomes the responsibility of all bearers of artistic practice to keep the path trodden by nomads through history alive. That is why we stress the importance of hospitality, and you're an extremely hospitable culture. I've had such a good time in the last 3 days, talking, listening, enjoying food and enjoying the company of others. I mean, it's clear that hospitality is a part of history here. And that is why, like I said, hospitality becomes a very interesting position of an ethic and aesthetic of hospitality, of permanent refuges for transients, as an essential factor in a new, old cultural matrix. To delve into roots in such spaces is necessarily to discover an intricate matrix of intersecting chaotic wills to globality. The idea of will to globality is something that came from the curator Okwi Envizor, who proposed a very radical conception. He said, we live on a spherical planet, which means no matter where you are, whether you're in Ulaanbaatar or in Almaty or in Tashkent or Bishkek or Delhi, you are at the center of this planet because you inhabit a sphere. it's completely incorrect to assume that the center of the planet is in St. Petersburg or in Paris or in Beijing, because any position on the globe can assume the question of the center. And I think this has a relationship to what becomes possible in the mind when you are located on the vast space of the steppe, the Central Asian steppe that stretches actually from the Altai Mountains, more or less to the Mediterranean coast. This is actually the space. And it's a space of an ever-expanding horizon, of an ever-expanding understanding that the planet is something much bigger than who we are. And the horizon always provokes us to ask, what lies beyond it? What's next? What comes forward? Where is the future? And that is a planetary conception. So while I completely understand your need here to re-emphasize local histories, I would urge you to consider the idea that Almaty is also, I heard Jama told me yesterday that there are two navels of the world in the Kazakh tradition. They are navels in the sense that they are umbilical cords to the planet. It is the center of the world, just as every other place is the center of the world. Our archives need to produce this sensibility, because that makes us think about a certain necessary correction to what we call the first draft of history. So let me stress another connection. Today we talked a little bit about the Saka people who populated parts of Kazakhstan. If you look at the official Indian non-Gregorian calendar, it is the Saka calendar. So it dates itself from the presence of the Saka people in northern and western India. So we count our years from the Saka calendar. So on the right, on the left, you see the Saka calendar. And this is, of course, this you know, the Saka golden treasures. My awareness of contemporaneity in Kazakhstan and contemporary art goes back to this time, to 2005, to the Central Asian Pavilion that was curated by Victor Miziano at the Venice Biennale. And it was fantastic for me to revisit some of these things. We were completely, I remember the three of us in Rux went to see this Biennale, and we were completely awestruck by the force and the grace and the power of what we saw. Of course, Rustam Khalfin, whose archive we talked about a few days ago. Also, Elena and Viktor Vorobiev, whom we visited, some of us, last evening. And it was remarkable to reconnect with my own memory of their work in their presence. And I think that one of the things that I felt very moved by was the fact that their practice as artists is also, in a sense, an archival practice. They commit themselves to creating an archive of their friend, Sergei Maslov, who also was from this city. And it's interesting that they may be Russophone artists, but Sergei Maslov, as I discovered, was very little known in the Russian cultural universe. So the Vorobievs produce a continuing archive of their friend's life and work. And here is this remarkable work that they translated into an artwork, Instructions to the Citizens of the Former USSR, which I think is a much more interesting term than post-Soviet. The former USSR as opposed to post-Soviet, because post-Soviet is like a bit of a hangover, whereas the former USSR is like a memory of a certain time, a difficult time, but it isn't weighing you down with a headache. Anyway, that's my personal take. I may be wrong. And Sergei Maslov's work as an archive lives on in the practice of these artists. And it points me to the idea that there is a way in which artists continually archive their world in their own practice in the way they think about their contemporaries, in the way they collect and work with memory. Here, for instance, is another archival work. This is actually Sergei Maslov's work that I discovered yesterday. It's a work called Baikonur, which we talked about a lot. And you can see that he has used photographic elements from many histories and montaged them on sort of strange science fiction-like extraterrestrial landscapes, as if the Baikonur rockets have actually carried these histories onto the wider world. And it's a very playful, it's irreverent, it doesn't deal with this romanticization of the space program. And at the same time, it suggests that this idea of the universe is something that belongs equally to all of us. It doesn't just belong to the people who built the cosmodrome. It belongs to all humanity to share. And it's interesting that this work, which predates Photoshop, is actually composed of what can only happen when you have an archival sensibility that says, I can take something from here and something from there and juxtapose them and see what happens. I saw a bit of that in Sәуле Khanum's presentation when you were making these new images out of older materials. That's an archival sensibility. And these sensibilities constitute what we like to call corrections to the first draft of history. It's said that the first draft of history is produced by journalism. And I think that the corrections to the first draft of history are done by artists, because they're not done by insisting on facts, but they're done by insisting on a play between fact and the imagination. Not to tell lies, but to perhaps discover truths that are not revealed by the facts, or other truths that become available to us through the imagination. So, and this produces a home, a nest. So the word Astana, which for you means the city of Astana, in my language, Bengali, also means a nest, a home, a space, especially for dervishes. So we say dervishes have an Astana, but also thieves and robbers and pickpockets have an Astana. So it's like two ends of the spectrum of moral behavior. The holy men have astanas and the thieves have astanas, right? So it's a way of thinking about creating a nest, creating a space where you can actually find yourself at home, and then proceeding onwards to the world. And I think that's what archives do. They create a home for us in memory. So what kind of homes and what happens to our homes? This is a nuclear test, the second nuclear test in a village in the Western Indian desert, the Thar Desert in Rajasthan, called Khetolai and Loharki, and the region is called Pokhran. And similarly, it has now become an astana, a home for radioactive fallout, right? Not unlike Kurchatov in the Semipalatinsk region. And this is a remarkable archival image because it shows actually people looking at a nuclear explosion. We went to a cinema today and I saw lots of posters for the film Oppenheimer, where of course everyone's talking about how they can't see the explosion and they must see where welder's glasses. I don't think anyone in Semipalatinsk bothered for a long time. But then what these spaces and their transformation and their hollowing out by these relentless nuclear explosions produced is a history of disease. And that's also in the archives. So in the image on the left, you see people demanding a cancer hospital in Khetolai and Pokhran, because there's a very high incidence of cancer in that part of the world, in that part of India. And similarly, of course, you know that in Semipalatinsk, there is a very high incidence of transgenerational cancer. So this child, Anjan Unyesbayeva, I think a 6-year-old child, third generation cancer patient, cancer runs in her family for 3 generations, is a photograph taken in the mid-2000s, so it's still continuing. And this is, in a sense, also an archive. So something happens in a nuclear test site, but our bodies become archives, and the archive gets passed on from one generation to the other generation. An archive of cancer in this instance. But of course, why was Semipalatinsk chosen? Because the archive tells us that Lavrenti Beria told Joseph Stalin, there's no one there. So the nomads who populated the Semipalatinsk region, who conducted their own life form of transhumance, who moved with their flocks and sheep, were not people. If you look at all the nuclear test sites in the world, whether it's in India or in Kazakhstan or in Algeria, where France tested nuclear weapons, or in Australia, everywhere there are people, and somebody says there are no people there. So the official archives records the absence of people, but life records the presence of people. And then the archive of disease passed on through generations tells us what happened to those people. Of course, this is something we also discussed. Where is the archive of the Ashar Shukul? I asked the gentleman who is the historian who talked about Ashar Shukul and its traces in the textbooks, whether there are any medical records of the famine. Were there places in which people, doctors, let's say, counted the fall in calories or the malnourishment indexes? And he said, no, there aren't, or not that he's aware of. For me, this is very interesting because at least then the archive can say it didn't happen because we didn't record that it happened. So with the Holodomor in Ukraine, we know that there are archival notings where Stalin actually directs people that the Ukrainian population must be reduced because there's such a problem. In Kazakhstan, there is not even a record of that, right? So what, there are some records? Okay, I'd be very interested to know what they are. But what is interesting for me is that the absence of records, the absence of a memory is also a memory, in a way. So forgetting becomes interesting and more problematic when we forget that we have forgotten. Do you know what I mean? And this persists. So the Irish famine is pretty well recorded. There was a famine in 1942 in Bengal, which is where my family comes from, which population-wise is actually bigger than all of these. So the Ashar Shukul is about, I think, 1.8 million people are supposed to have died. The Irish famine is 1 million die, 1 million leave. The Holodomor is about 3.9 million. The Bengal famine is 3.8 million people die in 2 years, right? And it's a human-made famine because it's not as if crops fail. It's because all the food is being diverted for the war effort. And Winston Churchill actually stops the delivery of shipments of wheat from Australia to Bengal because he says, no, this is needed for the soldiers. So if we construct an archive of the decisions taken by people as wide apart as Joseph Stalin to Winston Churchill, we realize that their notings in the files produce the deaths of millions. And it's a question of transposing the silence about these famines in the archives with maybe the stray references, maybe the one line, or maybe a few words that are exchanged, or maybe what we have to read between the files. I was in Nigeria recently and was completely taken over by the disease Plasmodium falciparum, which is malaria. And I had these delirious dreams thinking about whether or not I would be able to come to Kazakhstan, to Almaty. But it was as if the malaria was preparing me by making me see very strange connections between things that I would normally not see, because that's what deliriums do. So this parasite wrote malaria and delirium into the archive of my body and skin. I spent several days in a hospital, uncertain about whether or not I would finally make it to Almaty. and my febrile brain was trying to make sense of the contours of the difficult history of this land. I was raised a gardener of words, but I became a nomad who likes reading history. Sometimes in the early 20th century, the internet and then Web 2.0, which leaping out of computer screens and websites into Facebook posts, I would check on my phone as I walked, made surfing an instinct that no longer required the diligent cultivation or gardening of a plot of consciousness. My reading mind grew viral nomadic wings. I began carrying a growing portion of my library with me at all times, as if I was riding a camel, and on the camel were all these books. They would be Moby Dick, the Communist Manifesto, or Euclid's Elements, the philosophical works of Nagarjuna, a 10th century Buddhist in India, Spinoza, perhaps even Chingiz Aitmatov. Talismans I do not want to be parted from stayed in my laptop and in my mind and on my phone. That was my nomadic inheritance speaking. I'm grateful to Elmira Nogoybayeva, I hope I'm saying the name right, for talking yesterday about the Mankur, or the men whose memory has been taken away from them by force. As many of you know, the Kyrgyz writer who wrote in Russian, Chingiz Aitmatov, repurposed a trope from Kazakh folklore in his great novel, The Day Lasts 1,000 Years. And it's a strange novel because there is this man riding a camel to talk about his dead friend on the ground. And there are these American and Soviet cosmonauts trying to meet in space. So it's like it's going on constantly at two levels. And then history and myth and memory interferes. And the Mankur, the man without memory, becomes this kind of strange monster, an anti-memory presence. So if we are trying as artists, as intellectuals, as poets and writers to work with memory, we are constantly shadowed by our opposite, the Mankur, the person whose memory has been taken away from them. And I think it's very interesting that Aitmatov could repurpose this translocal figure who, like a nomad, comes from Kazakh folklore into Kyrgyz novel writing, into Russian language, and into the consciousness of the world, to become like a metaphor for what happened in Central Asia and how Central Asia forgot and then is trying to remember, was made to forget. I don't want to say forgot, but was made to forget in the way that the Mankur's skull was encased by this tight skin of camel skin. And I think it's very useful for us to think about how archives not only perpetuate some memories, but archives can also be instruments of forgetting. This seems like a strange idea, but I think it's something that we need to think about. This is a theme we'll return to later. So my interests and curiosities have become now my unruly livestock. They're like my goats and sheep and camel, and I can't really manage them. I'm their incompetent shepherd. And my nomad self, reading self, reads the 17th strophe of the 37th word of Abhay Kunanbayev's Book of Words. The world is a vast ocean. Time is a wind that never stops blowing. Generation follows generation like waves in the sea, hurrying one after the other. And on their restlessness, the eternity of life maintains itself. There's a very ugly statue of Kunanbayev in my city, Delhi. It's a bust. I mean, you can't get uglier than that. And but I'm grateful that it's there, forgotten by everybody in Delhi, and no one knows it's there, but I've seen it. But it got me curious about Kunanbayev. It's one of those official statues that the Republic of Kazakhstan has given to the Republic of Delhi, of India, sorry. And it's kind of a strange memory hole, a wormhole, if you like. I think I time travel. I read a fragment from Olja Suleymanov's strange and wonderful text, Asia, the name of a continent and an elaborate joke on the meaning of that name when broken into syllables. So I'm reading, I wish I was born in the mountains without being called a Kazakh, or lived in a white hut, herding cows near ravines. I would still be brought to Zhezhkazgan by train wagon, and you know what that name means. It's one of the biggest camps in the Gulag network. I beg your forgiveness, Ukraine. Look at when he's writing this, right? And how resonant it seems today. Or English, forgive my land. Kazakhstan, you're like vast 5 Frances put together. But no Louvres here or Montmartres. Instead, you contained all Bastilles of vile capitals like a huge labor camp. You were floating on that little map. We, the Kazakhs, were born in this camp. Suddenly, after reading this, everyone in the world can be a Kazakh nomad, because the world we live in is actually a continuation of the Gulag. It's not post that reality. There exist internment camps, concentration camps in India for outsiders, for aliens. There is a huge proposal to document foreigners in India who are mainly people from Bangladesh or Myanmar who have now come to live in India. And if that proposal is put through, it will be the biggest concentration camp assemblage in the world. And it's in preparation, right? There are similar camps in the United States. There are similar camps in France, in Netherlands, in Germany. The Gulag is actually not something that has ended. It has just metastasized into a global phenomenon, perhaps with different intensities, but that is also a question of time. When greater crisis comes, the global Gulag's reality will intensify. So suddenly everybody in the world can be a Kazakh nomad, just as the wandering Jew is also a descriptor for both a very specific and a very universal condition. In a delightfully mischievous poem called Audacious Hope or Duronto Asha, Rabindranath Tagore, a poet from my language, Bengali, speaks of his impulsive desire to stop leading the sedentary, safe life of those accustomed to too much self-affirmation of their identities. Rather than content with being a Bengali, with all its problems, with its difficult histories, Rabindranath suddenly and impulsively declares his true desire by saying, Ihar che hotem jodi Arab Bedouin, chorontole bishal moru digonte bilin. Were I much rather an Arab Bedouin, the vast desert under my feet, lost in the horizon. Kazakh nomad, wandering Jew, restless Bedouin. These figures do not sit easily in the archives. You can't contain them in files and the emptiness of boxes. They need open skies and the fullness of space around them. Somewhere else, Suleymanov says, a concentration camp is like a monument to empty space. In that emptiness, a person transforms from being a man or a woman or any kind of human being into a number, a noting in a file, a biometric inscription, a statistic. A human being gets forgotten when the number is called out. And we know that this reality existed, both within the system of gulags here and in all camps, internment camps all over the world. So that this is what the human being becomes, a number, a statistic. The quality of a person becomes a quantity, something that can be measured and filed away. But it's not as if the person entirely disappears. Their presence as a number in the file is haunted by their absence as a person. Any archive is haunted by its refusals and misremembrances, its deletions and lesions, and by blisters and warts. I read again. In the journal of the remarkable Kazakh educator, reformer, poet Fatima Gabitova, this strange insistence on the irreducible nature of a personal collection and of personal recollection. And she says, in the right compartment of my desk, there is a file of papers and letters. In it are the poems dedicated to me and the fiery messages written to me over the course of 18 years by the incomparable, extraordinary poet of his era and of his nation, Ilyas Jansugarov. In the drawer on the left are letters addressed to me full of beautiful, precious words from the celebrated Soviet writer, the giant of Kazakh prose, Mukhtar Ayuezov, yes, which he wrote to me over the course of 34 years. Both of these eminent spokesmen for the soul and the talent of their people loved me and honored me all their lives. Today, reading the letters of these people who were dear to me, it is as if I were conversing with them themselves, and the past passes before my eyes like a magical film reel. Think about the power of these words. This woman maintains this archive. Nadezhda Mandelstam maintains the archive of Osip Mandelstam's poems in her memory, so that she commits that poem to Stalin. It's not written down anywhere. It's in her memory, right? I don't need to remind you that Mukhtar Ayuezov, even though we see his statue in one of the squares, I saw it today, did 2.5 years in prison, and that Jansugarov was shot. These are files and papers. There are files and papers that tell us that. But another paper in another file, that Jansugarov died in the Gulag 10 years after he is said to have been shot, right? It's as if his identity multiplied while his person slipped away. And were it not for the vigilance of Fatima Gabitova, who kept his love letters and his poems in her own archive, he may have become an unperson, a shadow of a number without a name. There are other letters. In a letter dated 2nd June 1928, written from a state of internment in Almaty, or in Alma-Ata as it was known then, a man, later an unperson, erased from photographs and textbooks, a Ukrainian Jew called Lev Davidovich Bronstein, better known as Leon Trotsky, complains about letters from him that are never delivered to his addressees and letters to him that never arrive, right? So he's writing this complaint that I'm writing letters to you and nobody's replying, and you are telling me that you're writing letters to me that I don't get. So what's happening? There must be an archive somewhere in Moscow where these letters that did not reach their addresses are present, right? In the Rux Media Collective, we've been interested in letters and in correspondences for a long time. When we can't find them, we invent an archive, like we did with a work called K.D. Vyas Correspondence Volume 1. It's too complicated to show that work because it's 18 screens and it's a big architectural device. But I'll basically say that it's about the imagined writer of the Mahabharata, who is the great epic of Sanskrit literature, like many epics like the Iliad in a way, who is supposed to be immortal. So he's technically with us today. And we think of him as like a retired gentleman who's really angry and writes a lot of angry letters to the editor, and he writes them to us. So in this case, obviously, this doesn't exist, but we invent an archive of these letters. There are other letters that we find that actually exist, that are more fascinating than any invented archive. You see a slide of a man in a wheelchair, obviously injured, dictating a letter written for him by his comrade, another soldier. And this is from the First World War. And there's a whole collection of letters written by soldiers, Indian soldiers who served in Europe and in Mesopotamia, just as there would have been Kazakh soldiers who served in both the First World War and the Second World War, right? In Europe and in other battlefields, who wrote letters home. And when you write letters and you're in the army, somebody checks those letters, because what if you're writing something you're not supposed to write? And these letters were checked and by a military censor, which is why we have them today, because there is an archive. The letters have been collected, translated, commented on, and there's an interesting degree of commentary. So here is one of the letters. It says, "There is nothing left of me. I have lost a hand and a leg. What am I to do now?" Right? And they have given me a leg, but it's made of wood and vile. So obviously this is a soldier who's lost a leg. He's got a prosthetic leg and it's made of wood, and he doesn't like this leg. And he's writing about this leg. Now, what happens to these letters is that they get read by doctors, because they're usually written from hospitals where these men are recovering from their injuries. And they say, these men are going mad because there is too much poetry in their letters. They don't write prose, they write poems. Now, they're not writing poems because they don't see themselves as poets. This is how they write. This is, the world is going through this extraordinary insanity of the First World War. Here are these soldiers who are trying to make sense of a war that they don't understand, that is not their war. And they're trying to put that experience into words. What comes out feels like poetry to the military censor and the doctor looking at them. So they say they're going mad. This is a medical condition, but we don't know what it is. So we'll call it not yet diagnosed nervous. And we use this set of noting. So this is an archive of letters and an archive of comments on the letters by doctors and experts and military officers to create a kind of sense of what this world felt like. And it seemed as if these men were actually in a moment of sanity. They were saying the war was crazy, right? So you can see here a photograph again from the archive where three of these men, who are not even soldiers, they're people who clean up the battlefield, they're dancing in drag, right? As they're cross-dressing as women, they're queering their own history, while other soldiers look on in the Iraqi town of Kut, which is undergoing one of the worst sieges of the First World War. It's estimated that none of the people in this photograph survived, right? But before they die, they dance. Is that madness or is that sanity? I think this is a question that the archive asks of us. They even sing and recite poetry. So there is a remarkable archive of wax cylinder recordings, because some of them become prisoners of war in Germany, in Berlin, and an ethnomusicologist and an anthropologist makes recordings of their voices. And in these voices, they tell stories, they sing songs, they recite poetry. Sometimes they complain about the food, or they talk about their journey on a ship. And there are more than 300 recordings dating back to 1916 and 1915 of these men in several South Asian languages. And they're like a database of how people spoke then and what was their world. So we used all these elements in a work called Not Yet at Ease, which takes the spine, parts of the body. Now, this condition is one of shell shock, right? So I don't know whether it was discussed here, but people who returned, let's say, from Afghanistan, which is in living memory from the war in Afghanistan, would have had what is called post-traumatic stress disorder, right? They had various ailments, they would have repeated dreams. And during the First World War, the doctors said that this is shell shock. But if we say shell shock, then all the soldiers will say it because it's an easy thing to say. So we will give it a complicated medical term like not yet diagnosed nervous. And they said it's a bit like what happens to people when they travel on trains, because remember, trains are new and they're traveling at incredibly fast speeds, like 20 kilometers an hour, but which is very fast for that time. And people are having their spines disturbed and they have these headaches and so on. We don't think of 20 kilometers an hour as a fast speed, but perhaps in 1906, 7, 8, 12, it was a fast speed. So the archive actually talks about spines being dislocated and disturbed. And we made this work looking at these medical records that talk about all of this. Here you see a dancer who actually produces a tableau of disabled soldiers, soldiers blinded, soldiers who can't walk. And she creates, through space, this kind of archive of their movements as they travel right through this video. And a hand checks the spine, right? So this is actually an archival reading of a record of what happened to thousands of bodies in the First World War. They also performed plays. So in the middle of the war, these men would dress up as clowns, as comedians, as gods and goddesses, and get themselves photographed against backgrounds that they painted and performed their plays. So this is from somewhere in Belgium. And I always find this guy at the number 5 on him fascinating. What does that mean, that number 5? And it found its way, this photograph, into an archive from which it found its way to us and to the question of what does number 5 mean? To draw a figure in time, and all of these are figures in time, is to inscribe a mark on a difficult and slippery surface. As time passes, the reasons to remember grow stronger, but the ability to recall is weakened. Memory straddles this paradox. We could say that the ethics of memory have something to do with the urgent negotiation between having to remember, which sometimes includes the obligation to mourn. So when we remember the Algiers camp, we must mourn what happened to people who were there. But it also requires a requirement to move on, because if we only ended up mourning and grieving, we wouldn't be able to live our lives, which sometimes includes the necessity to forget a little. Both are necessary, and each is notionally contingent on the abdication of the other. But life is not led to the easy rhythm of regularly alternating episodes of memory and forgetting that cancel each other out in a neat equation that resolves to a peaceful zero. Residue, there's a residue of forgetting in every memory, and there's a residue of memory in every forgetting, is the fulcrum on which this negotiation between remembering and forgetting is undertaken. Because it is the unresolved, lingering aftertaste of an event that triggers the task of retrieving and dealing with the difficulty of its recollection. The question of what is to be done with this residue. Should it be burned, buried, frozen, embalmed, mourned, celebrated, commemorated, carried over, forgotten, or remembered, haunts us all the time. It haunts our personal lives as much as it haunts the larger histories we participate in and draw from. So coming here, listening to all of you talk about the repression of Stalinism made me suddenly remember my childhood memory of seeing that print of the 2 dictators, right? It's not a memory I deal with every day, but it's your memory makes a trigger that awakens something in my memory, and my need to deal squarely with my history while you deal with your history. That's what happens when we, who are archives, each one of us is an archive, meet each other and listen to each other. And our words play tricks with our memories. Oblivion, forgetting, is easily accomplished with the aid of what is usually called restoration or conservation, which it makes it possible to ignore or cosmetically invert the action of time on a physical surface. Today, we went on a walk through the architecture of Almaty, and we went to the former Lenin Palace, and we saw how a glass wall has made people, in a sense, forget what was there before. Or we saw mosaics in the Academy of Science in pictures, and we saw restoration and what it has done to the mosaic. So sometimes restoration is the best way to forget something, right? It's the easiest trick to forgetting something is to restore what the past is. So when we are collecting, let's say, folklore, songs, oral histories, be careful, because your act of collecting and indexing them can also be an aid to forgetting. I'm not saying it mustn't be, it must be done, but we must remember that archiving is as much about forgetting as it is about remembering. Sometimes this is deliberate, sometimes it's accidental. Sometimes we forget that we have forgotten. And that's the most dangerous part of forgetting, the forgetting that we have forgotten. So I think that art is an occasion for asking all these questions, because of the fact that we can commit ourselves to this tension between what we remember, what we imagine, and what we forget. It offers both the building blocks of an argument and a disposition to be alert to the material and its cognitive and emotional consequences of all these temporal processes. This engine, art, transports us to what I like to call, what we in RAAN like to call, an archive. So the word archive comes from the archon. It's a Greek word. It's the word for the ruler of the city or the king, right? So the king needs records. The archon needs a record. That is what the archive is. So archives are instruments by which those in power create their own records. So every archive is an archive, but we could also think of anarchives, which come from the opposite impulse, not from the impulse of the archon, but from the impulse of anarchy. I read an interesting statistic that the number of anarchists per profession is highest amongst librarians and then amongst mathematicians. So you think about anarchists as if they're creators of disorder, but actually they love order, except that it's order that doesn't answer the dictates of power. They see classification, ordering, the creation of taxonomies, the creation of systems as being something actually beautiful and playful, not as a response to the dictates of power, but as a response to desire and the needs of the imagination. So I think that it's possible for us to think of ourselves as artists, as orderly, order-driven anarchists. One of the greatest anarchist thinkers of the 19th century was Russophone, Igor Kropotkin, Prince Igor Kropotkin, who was a geologist and a biologist. And he worked a lot in the Siberian region to create an understanding of order, of the cooperation between species, not their competition, not their conflict, but cooperation. And it's interesting that contemporary biology is actually returning to these ideas to try and see how ecologies are shaped, because clearly they're shaped by coexistence. And the idea of coexistence seems to go against, and it's not Darwin's idea, the survival of the fittest. It's like Stalinism is not Marxism. Similarly, neo-Darwinism is not Darwin's ideas. So survival of the fittest is an archon's idea, an idea of power translated into order. Whereas Kropotkin gives us a different reading of the possibilities of order. So anarchives. What's an anarchive? Where are they found? I think they can be found everywhere. They're found in our memories, in our personal scrapbooks, in our family albums, in the newspapers that we throw away and that gather dust in our homes, in all the things, the ephemera and the flotsam and jetsam of our lives, which become valuable only when we forget them or remember that we have forgotten them, right? So here, for instance, is a note about what an archive can be. It's an archive constantly in process. So when I think of the Vorobyev's constant obsession with the archive of Sergei Maslov, I see an archive in process. When I see Oleg Karpov's remarkable collection of the photographs of the photographic heritage of Uzbekistan, particularly the juxtaposition of forensic criminalistic photography and this strange tourism brochure film, I see an anarchiving process, right? Because he's creating an order that obeys the command of his desires, his imagination, and his doubts and his skepticism. It's a very different impulse from the impulse of the state's archive. So we find archives everywhere, for instance, anarchives everywhere. So here, for instance, we found an anarchival object in a steel factory collection in Pittsburgh, which is the biggest center of the steel industry in the world. And it was something that a worker made in spare time. So you imagine that production targets are very high, people are constantly working. But here is a worker who makes a little companion, a dog, which also looks like a robot, made out of the bits and pieces of the things that he's working with. I think this object is an object in an anarchive. Or you find this strange object, which I found in the basement of a museum in Manchester, and it is a biscuit from the Paris Commune. So it's produced by the Bakers Federation of the Paris Commune, and somehow somebody gave it to a museum where it lives in a box, right? So we transformed this biscuit into an artwork. We made a 3D print of the biscuit, made a mold out of the 3D print, and got a baker to bake biscuits that could then be in the exhibition and could be taken by visitors and eaten. So a biscuit from the Paris Commune entered a Manchester museum in the middle of the 21st century, was eaten and became shit and went back into the sewers of Manchester. That's an anarchival process, right? And this is a way of dealing with memory as embedded in bodily processes. An anarchive is thus like a book of spells for conjuring, for reading auguries, for casting intermissions, and sometimes an aid to time travel to odd places and at tangents to the arrow of time. So normally we think of time as a sequential arrow, right? So the term post-Soviet means that there was a Soviet, there was a pre-Soviet, and now there's a post-Soviet. What if I said that this obsession with what comes before and after is a bit of a distraction? We can look at it differently through a different optic, through a different device. A friend of ours who now unfortunately died some years ago, who described herself as a Soviet American writer, Svetlana Boym. I would really urge you all to read her because she's a remarkable writer. She wrote this whole book called The Architecture of the Off-Modern. The term off-modern is something that we independently also came up with in the Rux Media Collective. And we Googled the term because, as you sometimes do, you've written something, so you Google it in the great archive of the internet. And you say, oh, there's someone else who's used it, right? We thought this was our invention. And here is this lady, Svetlana Boym, far away in Boston, who's also written the off-modern. So a friendship developed between the two of us based on this accidental discovery of the usage of the same term. And she says off-modern is not postmodern. It is a tangential relationship to the modern. It's at an angle to the modern. So if modern is on this plane, postmodern is not something that follows, is something that follows after, but the off-modern is an intersection with the modern. So it provides people in many parts of the world, like in the former USSR, like in India, as I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, that we had a different relationship to modernity. We were not before it or after it. We were at a tangent to it. So what if I said off-Soviet, at a geometrical angle, tangential to the plane, the flat plane of what became Soviet experience? It gives it an angularity. It gives it an acuteness and an obliqueness that complicates this flatland of what became narrativized as the Soviet experience. That gives us an opportunity to rethink our memories in different ways. Gives us an opportunity to think about the strange relationship between people who may be victims and perpetrators within the same family, right? There are people who got sent to the Gulag. There were people who sent them to the Gulag. There were prison guards in the Gulags, and sometimes all three were from the same household. What's that relationship? How do we account for it? How do we square ourselves with it? This is actually something that happens in all histories which are stained by totalitarian pasts, where there are no neat divisions between heroes and villains. There are complicated relationships. And our task of looking at the archive is the responsibility to be disturbed, but also excited by finding this complication and this offness, this obliqueness. Which brings me to another archival object, a handprint. This is a handprint that was produced in the year 1858 in Bengal as a proof of identity, right? In a road construction contract. And this proof of identity is the ancestor of fingerprinting technology, because this handprint was taken to London, where it became the basis for the science and the criminalistic science of fingerprinting. So if you think about biometrics, which we all have to do nowadays at airports, it comes from this handprint of one man called Raj Konai. In 2011, we repurposed this work, this handprint, and called it the unlikely intimacy of digits, because this is now a digital artifact, the biometric profile that we offer to the state. But its digits also mean fingers in the English language, or in Latin at least. So we offer our fingers, our digits, to a digital database, and that creates our identity as a number, because we get then processed into a number, and that becomes our identity for the purposes of the state. And in India, there's something in process called the Unique Identification Database, which is the largest biometric database in the world. So we've got 1.4 billion citizens, and this is supposed to be a registration of the irises, the eyes and the fingerprints of 1.4 billion plus people. There has never been such an exercise. It is bound to fail, right? Because we don't as yet have the computing power to be able to deal with biometric data of more than 1 billion people. But the point is that it is deployed politically. So nowadays, when the state tries to identify people as subversives, or anti-national is a term that is often used, it's the same as Article 58 of the USSR Constitution, enemy of the people. In India, the term is anti-national, right? And this becomes reducible to finding out your unique identification database number and tracing it and tracking it as you move in space and time. So this is a work, The Untold Intimacy of Digits, which becomes a count to infinity, to infinitude. Every time you open it, it counts to infinity. And infinity, and the logic of infinity, is actually the opposite of the logic of being able to count something. Because between the numbers 1 and 2, there is an infinity. Between 2 and 3, there is an infinity. And there are infinities within infinities. And in our current political infrastructure, where citizens and people are constantly being transformed into numbers and databases and archives, to transpose an insistence on the fact that every human being is actually a living example of infinity, seems to suggest a relationship between an archive that is capable of thinking infinity and archives that can only count numbers. This is an instance of what that operation is at play. So every time you see it, like you saw it just now, it counts forward to the uncountable, to something that cannot be contained by the archive. And I think of infinities as the nomads of numbers. They keep wandering between the number line. They cross it, they go beyond it. They suggest to us qualities that cannot be reduced to quantities. I'll stop here for now.
Good afternoon, everybody. I guess everyone is a bit tired after 3 days of such intense discussions and presentations. I'm delighted to be with you, although unfortunately not in person. But thanks to the hybrid format of this event, I've been able to follow the presentations of my colleagues, and I enjoyed learning more about your work. And as I will be speaking today about my art and research practice, I hope that we can find some points of resonance, between what we do. And I think, there are lots of points of resonance. Okay, and it's really nice to see some familiar faces in the audience. I'm presenting in English. It was not a straightforward choice, as I'm an ethnic Kazakh and my mother tongue is Kazakh, but I grew up speaking fluently and comfortably the Russian language, which is again this the reflection of this on this peculiar post-colonial condition, that we find ourselves in. But I chose to present in English mostly out of convenience, because I will be operating with some concepts that come from Anglophone literature. Of course, I will be happy to handle the question and answer session afterwards in both languages, in Russian and in English. So today I'm going to talk about my research. Sorry, I think I should start sharing already. I will talk about my art and research that that focuses on the topic of culture, memory, trauma, the role of art as a medium of memory. And I will show some of my works. In particular, I will talk about my most recent work titled Mariam, which is dedicated to the memory of my grandmother. And I will resume this presentation with the screening of a film, of my hand-drawn animation film, All the Dreams We Dream, that explores the memory, or rather I can say non-memory, in memory of the Kazakh famine in the 1930s that was caused by the policies of collectivization and sedentarization in Kazakhstan. And after the screening, hopefully we'll have time for questions and answers. So I would like to ask people on Zoom, to please hold your questions and comments to the time afterwards, because I'm very easily distracted by the popping notifications. And I will begin. So I will begin by presenting, by introducing myself. So I'm a visual artist and researcher. Currently, I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Amsterdam. I did my PhD, a practice-led PhD, or PhD through an artistic practice at the University of Leeds. And it focused on the role of art, again, as a medium of memory, with a particular focus on cultural memory and trauma in post-Soviet Kazakhstan. And I also identify myself as a post-generation artist by using the word post-generation. I'm referring to the concept of post-memory, which I think is familiar to many of you in memory studies. Basically, post-memory is the memory of children of survivors of the Holocaust, and it was coined by Marian Hirsch. Born after the catastrophic events to parents that endured enormous violence and loss, these generations form a special connection to the past that they themselves did not live through. And their memory is a specific type of memory that is emotionally charged, that is marked by gaps and absences. And it is also hybrid memory, as the post-generation personal experiences, memories, get entwined with those of their parents or grandparents. And Hirsch's concept was developed specifically in the context of the Holocaust, but in memory studies, it's been used widely and expansively in regard to other historical atrocities. In the case of Kazakhstan, it is the Stalinist terror that we talk about, that differs from the Holocaust in that it is not a singular event, but a number of interconnected events and atrocious policies such as, and many are familiar with this again, Stalinist purges, ethnic deportations, and man-made famines. At the same time, when we speak about post-generation, we always mean some form of inheritance. But what kind of inheritance is it? On the one hand, there is this concept of post-generational trauma, which is complex. And as it happens, it is often overused, just like the concept of trauma itself. Yeah, because we hear people talking about trauma, about working through trauma. Oh, I'm so sorry. There is direction in Freudian psychoanalysis that builds upon Freud's studies of phobias, suggesting that these phobias could be the results of not personal traumas, but those of the closest family members. And in particular, Nicholas Abraham talks about the phantom, a foreign element in a person's psyche, something that was produced by someone else's traumatic experience, an invisible and uninvited guest whose presence is nevertheless sensed very strongly. And now to make it a bit clearer, about trauma. Trauma is, again, a very complex concept. It differs from bodily injury in that it is psychic. It causes a structural change in the psyche. We conceptualize trauma as an absence. It is the absence of cognition. It is the absence of memory. Often we hear this word traumatic memory. Very commonly used. But it is actually self-contradictory because trauma does not become a memory. Due to its extreme nature, traumatizing experiences cannot be fully processed by the psyche. So it still stays within the psyche, within the body, uncognized, and manifests itself with recurring symptoms such as phobias or nightmares, flashbacks, and so on. But although it is not recognized, trauma is still transmissible. So we can imagine how these persistent symptoms present in parents and grandparents can affect children. So transgenerational trauma is the legacy of guilt, pain, shame, untold secrets, ungrieved losses that we somehow inherit. And of course, transgenerational traumas are not the only type of inheritance that we deal with as post-generation. When we speak about post-Soviet Kazakhstan, again, the issue of difficult heritage becomes a part of post-colonial discourse, because in Kazakhstan, it is painfully tangible. For example, there are ecological consequences of the systemic exploitation of the land, such as nuclear testing in Semipalatinsk, which many speakers mentioned in their talks, or the drying Aral Sea, or the exhaustion of natural resources, that we actually feel the effects of this exploitation in our bodies, within our bodies. And I know that many contemporary Kazakh artists address this issue, so it's another way of addressing the lasting legacies, as a post-generation. And at the same time, we can also speak about another form of continuity or a lasting condition that we may call post-totalitarian condition. As it happens, totalitarian regimes produce a certain type of logic, as that Griselda Pollock and Max Silverman call concentrationary. They draw upon the text, L'univers concentrationnaire, the concentrationary universe, written by French writer David Rousset, a survivor of the Nazi camps. They also draw upon the argument by Hannah Arendt that the 20th century's totalitarian regimes that instrumentalized the concentration camp showed to us that everything is possible. Everything is possible, even the unthinkable is possible. And as they argue, this extreme violence and dehumanization that happened in concentration camps did not stay in the concentration camps. They were not confined to the territory of the camp. this logic, this concentrational logic, it seeped and creeped into the society, shaping it somehow. And the same logic can still be traced today in art, in popular culture. So one thing to address it is to stay vigilant, to the signs, to the effects of this concentrational logic. And here it's easy to find parallels, of course, with the society of Gulag, or territory of Gulag, as Svetlana Boym puts it, writing on the coexistence of this bare life, as we can say, in Soviet labor camps, and the ordinary life in the Soviet Union that was sparkled somehow by this imaginary, by the dreams created in the Soviet dream factory, art, cinema, literature, and so on. So now we can move to the role of art in post-totalitarian, post-colonial societies. I myself see art as a medium of memory, as it makes possible to mediate trauma through aesthetic transformation. It allows us to create some form of presence, some form of cognition in place of traumatic absence. It is through this affective and imaginative engagement that we can touch upon difficult topics. By finding a visual or audio-visual form for an imageless event, an event without a witness, without an image, the artist can contribute to the creation of a cultural memory, which is especially important in cases of silenced pasts, unacknowledged pasts, or events that have been censored out of from this public remembering. And at the same time, artists have power, as Jan Assmann in particular argues. He sees them as authorized bearers of memory, as they produce meanings, just as other authorized bearers do, like priests, historians, writers. They produce meanings that can sustain in time and that can circulate in cultural memory. Or in other words, as artists, we contribute to the creation of a canon. And this endows artists with certain responsibility, right? What kind of canon is being created? What kind of messages do artworks communicate? And as I spoke about concentrationary imaginary, it is easy to reproduce in new works of art the narratives and cliches that have the same concentrationary logic that may diminish or dehumanize certain groups or certain people or normalize violence. Also, to work with traumatic legacies of mass atrocities means to be in touch with stories of people who died violent deaths or endured unthinkable violence. What kind of gaze do we adopt towards them? The gaze that sees them as perpetual suffering, or the gaze that exposes them in their vulnerability for the viewers, or catharsis? Or is it an empathic gaze? Or if there is an empathic gaze, what kind of gaze it is? What is an empathic gaze? I like the concept of witnessing by artist and psychoanalyst Bracha Ettinger, who speaks about witnessing as not as mere witnessing, but a form of being with, or staying with the suffering other, or rather residues, kind of resonances of the experience. In witnessing, the artist makes herself fragile, opening up to this resonances of the pain of the other person. And this question of the role of artists as mediators of memory is complex. It cannot really be fully addressed in a 20-minute talk. I would be happy to discuss it during the question and answer session and hear about what you think about it. For me, art making is a form of creating a form of presence in place of absence, like I said, and it is also partly I think, is a form of staying with a difficult or contested heritage, difficult past, which can be a certain fragment of memory. It can be an idea, it can be a trace, yeah. And it is not always about the result, it's often about the process itself during which the work of memory happens. Now I can move on to the discussion of my works, because it's always a bit more interesting to show than to just set up conceptual frameworks. So the first work I want to share with you is the most recent one. It is titled Maryam. It has been recently shown in the exhibition curated by Alexandra Tsai on reimagining ornaments in the Center of Heritage Art and Textile in Hong Kong. It is the work that reflects on and deals directly with family memory and the issues of invisibility and loss. It addresses the legacies of the Soviet colonial project, in particular the policy of the alphabet change in Central Asia as part of cultural assimilation. I'm sure that many of you are aware of the history of the alphabet change in Kazakhstan, but I will still give a brief overview for our international colleagues. So since 13th century, Kazakhs used Arabic script, which in the 20th century was perfected and developed into a system of writing known as Tutiye Жазу by scholar and educator Ahmed Baytursunov. In 1929, the Arabic script was changed to Latin for quite a brief time. And in 1940, it was replaced by the Cyrillic alphabet that is still in use. This decade in between the 30s, yeah, so mass atrocities such as the Stalinist purges and collectivization famine, the brutal famine, human-produced, through which Kazakhstan was Sovietized, as historian Sarah Cameron argues. Ahmed Baytursunov himself was executed in 1937. So my work, Maryam, is dedicated to the memory of my grandmother. Maryam is her name. She was born in 1911 in eastern Kazakhstan in Semipalatinsk, or near Semipalatinsk. She learned the Arabic script as a young girl, but as later the alphabets were changed, she did not have a chance to learn the official Cyrillic script until much later in life. As she was taking care of a big family in the absence of her husband, who was at the time in Siberia, in the Stalinist Gulag, yeah, she really did not have a chance to teach herself the Cyrillic until much later in life. In the 70s, she learned it without the help of someone else. She taught herself the Cyrillic, which gave her access to texts published in the Soviet times. But for 45 years, a lifetime, she has stayed excluded from the dominant code, cultural code of the time. For this work, I embroider her name, Maryam, as well as various Kazakh words and letters in 3 alphabets: Arabic, Latin, and Cyrillic. This process is time-consuming. It is invisible to the viewer, and the outcome does not reflect entirely on what happens in the process. I think I have to move this somewhere. The series consists of, The series consists of 15 canvases, and each canvas becomes a space for encounter with my family's history, with cultural erasure, with invisibility, with loss. Each canvas provides a surface space for a work of memory to happen. As I embroider words in Arabic letters, I also perform an act of transgenerational learning. Arabic, as you know, is written in the opposite direction to Cyrillic and Latin, so it's written from right to left, and at times it feels to me like a reversed movement. Yeah, like an act of reversal. It's like a reverse movement back in time. This process is tactile. It is durational. It cannot be speeded up. I cannot skip stitches, yeah, because I break something. I break the method, and every attempt to speed it up ruins the thread. It's actually like an act of obligation. You are obliged to stay with this difficult past. And also I embroider with the yarn of the same color as the fabric, such as gray and gray. Most of the canvases are gray. I think I can show. Yeah, most of the canvases are gray. I deliberately remove color and contrast from this piece of work to signify the broken connection to the tradition. Kazakh embroidery traditionally uses contrasting saturated colors such as red, green, blue, brown, black and white, yeah. But by removing the contrast from these pieces, I offer a metaphor for the invisibling effects of the systemic suppression and appropriation of voices. The resulting image is not seen, at least not from the distance. The viewer has to come close enough to see the letters, and the piece prioritizes touch to vision, so it invites you to touch it rather than see it. The canvases are arranged in a grid, which Rosalind Krauss sees as emblematic of modernism with its will to silence. I use the grid to refer to modernity that absorbs the living tradition and destructs narrative. Okay, so the second work I would like to talk about, or I would rather just show it. It is about my hand-drawn animation. Yeah? The film that derives from my work with the memory fragments of the Kazakh famine in the 1930s. Yesterday, Beripol gave a great talk on the Kazakh famine, its causes, and all the rhetoric about it. So the famine, as you know, was caused by the policies of collectivization, which is the confiscation of property for collective farms, and sedentarization, making nomadic people settle. The violent policies resulted in the death of 1.5 million Kazakhs, at least, which was at the time about 30 to 40% of the population. The famine can be considered a limit event or an event of such extremity that it shakes the very foundations of the society, leaving the irreparable rupture. When I speak about the memory of the famine, I prefer to call it rather a non-memory or in-memory, yeah, as it is only in the recent years that it began to gain proper acknowledgement. For 70 years after its occurrence, survivors of the famine were silenced. The event was not properly documented, or documentation has not been made available yet. Hence, a cultural memory of this event has not taken shape. It is slowly, gradually taking shape now, yeah, from the studies of this event, from the works of art that is done about the famine, from like all the narratives that we are developing together. And again, to refer to Beripol's talk yesterday, I remember that at school, in my secondary school, in historical textbooks, the famine was referred to as Jut, or Падеж скота in Russian, as if it was caused by a natural disaster, such as drought, yeah, and not due to the Soviet policies. Due to time restraints, and I guess like being the last speaker, everybody is quite tired already. I will not speak about much about this work, but simply show the film. I would only say that my original intention was not to make the film. The film evolved from separate animated drawings, which I did based on people's memoirs. In particular, I worked with 2 memoirs of Kazakh poet Gafur Kairbekov on encountering famine victims in the steppe. Certainly, gradually, it became a 21-minute film in 3 acts that mimics the structure and style of the silent films of the 1920s. All the drawings are hand-drawn. They're animated as a stop motion. So I as I draw, I erase, I draw again, all under like direct under camera animation. And this prolonged repetitive action reflects on the nature of memory, which is a constant flow on the one hand, but it also is practiced through repetition. At the same time, it is again the act of staying with or witnessing the event. It is witnessing the event without a witness. The past I did not endure personally, yeah, but for which I act as a missing link, yeah. I become a secondary witness of this difficult past. It is also about staying with the experiences of the fallen who were denied language, who were denied human voice, who could not testify for themselves.